what technology wants is to assume that we're talking about something that is separate from us as humans, as the people that build and use these tools. And to assume this separation, I think, would be a really big mistake. Because technology, that invisible, embedded digital layer that is superimposed on every aspect of our lives, isn't just a part of us, it's actually a reflection of who we are as a species. Technology amplifies everything, the best and the worst aspects of humanity. You can find altruism, generosity, connection, community on the same websites and in the same technological infrastructure as the places where you'll find hatred, bigotry, racism, cruelty, bitterness, and anger. It's one of the clearest ways that we can see our flaws because, in a way, technology doesn't lie. It reflects our world, our needs, our priorities, and our impulses right back at us. And I think a lot of people struggle with this because we've been raised on archetypes that are quite binary, the hero and the villain, or good versus evil. But culturally, our reality is far more nuanced and it can't easily be separated into these either-or categories. So when people ask me if I think technology will be good for society or bad for society, I say yes, because I think it's going to be both. Technology will simultaneously be our hero and our villain. It'll be good and evil. And that makes it really hard to wrap our heads around the impact of these tools on our lives. So will technology take jobs and will it kill entire industries? Yes. But will it create new ways for people to prosper? Yes. Will it help society? Yes. Will it hurt society? Also yes. And sometimes we'll find those contradictions in the same company. The same organizations that will do so much to help us advance and implement technology for the greater good will be the same companies whose proprietary algorithms can manipulate and divide us. So my first thought when I was thinking about this question is, you know what, we need to get really comfortable with navigating ambiguity. And as humans, we're not so good with ambiguity. I know I'm not that great with it. But we have to understand that it is going to be one and the same, that the same technologies that power predictive diagnostic algorithms that, for example, can help spot cancer before it spreads, is also powering practices like redlining or using data to discriminate against certain parts of the population in order to deny them financial services. And if that isn't complicated enough, we haven't even gotten to the part where we figure out what it is that we want. Because it's not just one set of wants. No, our technology today is a reflection of colliding and intersecting agendas that mix opinions and worldviews and profit models all in one. It's a pretty complicated knot to untangle, but I'm going to try. So the first thing is that we've put ambiguity aside, which is great, so we're just going to put it aside and embrace the complexity. Now, the second thing that we need to remember is while we think that technology is neutral, in reality, technology is always influenced by the intention of the people that are creating it. So while the ones and zeros in binary code, themselves are neutral, they stop being neutral the second somebody programs them into a command. I kind of think of it like cooking, right? A carrot is just a carrot until somebody picks it up and decides to add it to a specific recipe with a final dish in mind. So let's take the case of self-driving cars. If an autonomous car is driving down the street and somebody illegally crosses the road when they're not supposed to, whose safety should the car prioritize? The passengers inside the car or the pedestrian crossing the street? Does it matter if that pedestrian is a man or a woman? Does it matter if they're old or if they're young, if they're like a kid? What about the people in the car? What about the passengers? Would you change your answer if you knew that there was a grandma in the car, a child in the car, a pregnant woman in the car? What if the pedestrian was legally crossing the street, but there was a malfunction? Who should the car save? Now, MIT asked tens of thousands of people those questions, and they found varying answers that depended on people's geographic regions, their age, their genders, a whole wide variety of factors. But one thing was clear, there was no consensus on who the car should save. So how can we expect our technology to do the right thing when we can't even agree on what the right thing is? Our technologies aren't simply extensions of ourselves. They are the manifestation of our belief systems, of our worldviews, of our wants, of what we think the world should be. And every one of those beliefs and worldviews and wants, they always come with unintended and unexpected consequences. Let me give you another example. So the internet, right, the World Wide Web, in its earliest form was originally created by scientists and researchers and academics. And within that context, it made sense for information to flow freely, giving rise to one of the foundational beliefs of the World Wide Web, that information should be free, and giving rise to the democratization of content. Now, a free and open web has been one of the central tenets in internet culture since the technology first became accessible to the public. But let's think about this for a second, the democratization of content. In theory, the idea of making information freely available and removing barriers is great, right? Because one of the best benefits of our modern day internet is just how easy it is to learn something. Whether I want to learn how to remove a red wine stain from the carpet, or play the piano, or learn to code, or learn about strategy or finance, the information is simply a click away. And it doesn't matter if I don't have money. I can take classes for free at institutions like MIT and Harvard. That's a good thing. But there was a cost in letting everyone and anybody publish and share information. There were several costs, in fact. Let's look at a couple of them. So one, in removing some of the barriers of who could share and who could create information, we impacted the integrity of the information system. So especially in the age of social media, where every unit of information is treated as equal. So when I'm scrolling through my Facebook feed, right, I'll see an article from Les Echos, which is a newspaper, and a friend's opinion about current events, and these two posts will occupy the same priority on my feed. Facebook doesn't say this is a newspaper written by experts and this is your friend. And that's what most people's internet experience is like, which is to say that all posts are created equal. And considering that research shows that many people get their news and information from social media, you can start to see how this is a little bit problematic. Because it's become effortless to share information that's not true. And the institutions that are trying to share relevant information, they get drowned out in a sea of noise. Two, because of this growing expectation of free information, journalistic institutions that are normally held to a set of ethical and professional guidelines find it harder and harder to compete with outlets that could publish posts without having to fact check. Producing well-researched fact-check stories takes a lot of energy. It takes time and work and money. And in the US, we've seen the decimation of local news outlets and regional newspapers because it's simply too difficult to compete when your competitors are creating information for free and they're not held to the same standards that you are. So what we've done is that we're weakening institutions that were designed to share an impartial truth. And since democracy depends on an informed populace, what will happen when it gets harder and harder for us to be informed? We've already seen how fake news and these untrue narratives played a big part in undermining the validity of the American elections in 2020 and resulted in the riots in the Capitol on January 6th. Three, as companies started moving into the digital space, the expectation of free content left them with few options to fund their products, right? So the advertising model was the only one that made sense. So the introduction of ad technologies and big data meant that if companies needed to provide free content, they had to convince advertisers that they could help them reach their target consumers. And today, we are living with the results of those decisions that were made, a couple of years ago, where companies, it's perfectly normal and a perfectly normal practice for companies to sell our personal data to advertisers. And the wild part is because we're so used to having information come to us for free that we're willing to exchange and trade pieces of our personal data of ourselves in order to access these social networks for free. And given the rise of predictive algorithms, we now have services that are able to extrapolate information about you before you've even volunteered it. Honestly, I don't think many people know just how much information is gathered about them online. For example, Facebook advertisers can access nearly 100 separate data points about a particular user. Things like that user's musical preferences, their favorite TV shows, their political views, their family tree, the number of cousins they have, the last time they went on vacation, even the likelihood that they've recently purchased allergy pills or over-the-counter cold medication. And this layer of data is becoming more sophisticated because now with our smartphones, we're adding another layer, our physical location, so where we go in the real world and who we're physically with. There was this story that I heard a few years ago where this man walks into a Target, which is an American retail chain, and he demands to speak to the manager. He's very upset. And he's angry because the store, which sends these personalized flyers, was sending his teenage daughter promotions about baby products like diapers and strollers, and he thought this was hugely inappropriate because she's a teen. So the manager apologizes, I'm so sorry, sir, this won't happen again. The man goes home, and a few days later he comes back. And this time it's his turn to apologize because it turns out his daughter was in fact pregnant and he didn't know. So how did Target, this big company, how did they know that she was pregnant before her own family did? Well, data. Because Target uses sophisticated algorithms that track purchases over time. And they've realized that if a person purchases a certain group of products together, like unscented lotion, vitamins, hand sanitizers, etc., that it's a big indicator that they're in the first trimester of pregnancy. And they can even use that information to predict when the due date is going to be for that family, so they can start sending personalized advertising suggestions just before you need something. So even though the daughter never volunteered that information, she never said, I'm pregnant, Target knew anyway. And this is where it gets worrisome because we start getting into these privacy invading techniques where companies might be able to guess things about you that you never wanted to share. So 4, the democratization of content, the ease in which anybody can publish and share information, has also given rise to an entire industry that's devoted to sharing fake news. Basically, anybody can pretend to be an expert, anybody can pretend to be an informed source, anybody can pretend to have the right data sets, and anybody can have access to a platform to broadcast their opinions and views to their network or to other people at scale. And there are websites, for example, that are designed to look like reputable newspapers that are actually partisan content farms. And we're seeing in this space, especially in the fake news domain, a variety of different agendas playing out. So it was recently reported that Russia and China were helping to amplify QAnon conspiracy theory content to American users for their own geopolitical reasons. There are influencers who make money from promoting fake news and others who share this information with their audience because they genuinely believe it's true. So in short, there's no one belief system. It's just messy and loud out there. But all of these different scenarios that I've mentioned, they came from that first belief of the web, this idea that it would be good to have a free and open web. And a world where educated academics are exchanging information is a very different intention than a current reality where your aunt on Facebook is sharing 5G conspiracy theories. And I want to be clear here, I don't think the idea of an open and a free web is a bad one. I'm just using it as an example to show how a belief in what an early version of a technology should be, what we believe it should be, can have a ripple effect even decades later. So as you can see, these types of decisions have a big impact on our culture, and it's having an impact on us. So a few years ago, Snapchat had this filter where it was a flower crown that was supposed to make you look cute, right? It was just this fun digital accessory that you could put on your head, these digital flowers, so you can take a nice selfie. But in addition to adding that flower crown, the filter also did a bunch of other stuff to your face. It made your eyes bigger, your chin pointier, your skin whiter. What message is that sending? Somebody who programmed this filter decided at some point that a beauty standard involving lighter skin and bigger eyes and a certain face shape is what made somebody beautiful. So beauty is no longer in the eye of the beholder, it is now in the eye of the coder as well. Because what we're seeing culturally as a result of all of these filters that do this to people's faces is the rise of young people who want to get plastic surgery and other procedures to look more like their filtered selfies. And this is having an impact on people's mental health and their self-esteem. So we're using technological features to sell people this idealized version of beauty that was decided upon at some point in time and then codified, literally embedded into code. So when I study digital culture and I look at belief systems, I think belief systems is one of the most powerful lenses that you can use. And I'd like to share with you now a framework that I've created to help analyze these technological platforms. Now, I work with organizations by using this approach to reveal the worldviews and ideologies that are embedded in the tools that they use every day, often without even thinking twice about it. So there are 5 layers of beliefs that I like to look at in order to understand from a digital culture perspective what's happening. And keep in mind, this is just a very brief overview. So the first layer that I look at is the funder layer. I ask myself, what do the funders believe? This means I look at the people that are paying and investing in this technology, and I try to understand what their strategy is, what they want, what they believe to be true. Let me give you an example. Reid Hoffman, the founder of LinkedIn, who has now formed a venture capital firm called Greylock, he popularized this idea of something called blitz scaling, which is a strategy that's often used in Silicon Valley to help companies get very big very, very fast. The premise is you want to immediately dominate the market and you want to create a monopoly at any price, even if you haven't quite figured out your business model yet. Because they believe, blitz scalers believe, that the company that can reach scale the fastest first wins. Usually what that looks like in practice is that investors will pour billions of dollars into companies, for example, like Uber, that then get valued at billions of dollars, even though the company hasn't even been profitable. So if this is your belief system and you have the money, then this winner-take-all strategy will have an impact on the rest of the market. So in Uber's case, Uber was able to offer lower prices to riders because they could subsidize the cost from their deep coffers, something that taxi companies couldn't do. But how sustainable is that over the long term? Like, not only for Uber, but for an ecosystem where competition is actually stifled due to these artificial pricing models. And by the way, it's not just Uber, it's unicorns in general. Consider that in 2020, 90% of American unicorns, so companies that are valued at over $1 billion, were unprofitable. Now, this is a direct result of this belief system that is embedded in strategies like blitzscaling, which is being implemented and is having an impact on the health and the sustainability of entire industries. So that's the first layer, funders. The second layer is the founder's vision. So what do the founders, the people that make the technology, what do they believe to be true? Let's take Twitter. So Twitter was created because Jack Dorsey and Ev Williams thought that brevity, shortness, was better. They believed that short messages were better and preferred to longer ones. But as the platform grew in both popularity and influence, especially when some politicians started to use it to communicate, we started to see some unintended consequences. So we know this. We know that our world is nuanced and complex, and we know that sometimes it's just not possible to reduce an entire argument into 280 characters. Things like foreign policy or information about a global pandemic or political arguments or scientific facts or breaking news. And with everything being consistently shortened to these 280 characters, people were missing key details. What happens when you build a channel of communication where everyone learns to consume everything in these tiny bite-sized bits? We lose our ability to deep dive. We use our habit of reading things at length and figuring things out. And Twitter recognized this problem. They realized that users were sharing articles with their networks, with their followers, without even reading the articles. So they tried to introduce a feature that would ask you, hey, do you maybe want to read this article before you share it? But what does this say about our culture that enough people were going just by the headline and not even reading the contents of the article? They were being informed based on headlines. How will this impact our ability to understand deep, complex ideas? Also, on a funny note, right, people's responses to the limitations of this shortened character limit was to create Twitter threads, right? So they would just create all of these threads and they're like, yay, we figured it out. But no, you just reinvented the paragraph. And the reason we have paragraphs is because not everything can be conveyed in 2 sentences. So that's the second layer. What do the founders look for? The third layer is looking at what belief systems are prioritized and built into the platform itself. So for this example, I'm going to use WhatsApp, the messaging app, right? So WhatsApp has a feature where it sends those horrible double blue check marks that lets other people know when you've read the message that somebody has sent you. It also lets people know when the last time you were online. So in this case, the app believes that people should be accessible, and responsive, and they should be constantly responding to messages. Because it's designed, those features are designed to create a social pressure to respond, because culturally it's considered rude to be left on read. So we look into different features from different tools to get a sense of what beliefs and values and worldviews are being embedded into the code. In WhatsApp's case, we see how a messaging service is actually reflecting etiquette and the expectations of digital communication right back at us. So that's the third layer. The fourth layer is to take a step back and look at the users and to see how are users applying or engaging with this platform from a digital culture context. Now, this is really interesting to me because I love to see when consumers adapt or use platform features in an unintended way. Take the social audio app Clubhouse. One of the behaviors that developed early on in the use of the app organically without any input or direction from the founders is to flash your mic button on and off very quickly as a way to signal digital applause or as a way to tell the person speaking that you support the point being made. This indicated that despite the fact that the feature wasn't available, right, the founders didn't want this to be a part of the platform or didn't intend for it to be, users thought that this interactivity was important. And what's interesting is that this mic flashing behavior didn't happen on Twitter's social audio feature, Twitter Spaces. It was uniquely a Clubhouse thing. So even in the same category, we see different cultural elements that are being applied based by what the users believe and what the users want. And sometimes what users believe is going to be different than what the technology founders or the funders intended. Now, the fifth and final layer is to look at how bad actors exploit the platform, because that's where the intention piece comes into play, right? This can be very different than the original purpose of the technology. And it's important to note that exploitation exists on every single platform. I mean, really, anything that humans have ever been made, someone somewhere has found a way to exploit it for their own personal gain. So from phishing scams to fake news, to using social media to spread hate, to all of this, misuse always exists, and honestly at this point we should just expect it. A prime example is when Microsoft released an AI bot that was supposed to mimic a 19-year-old girl, and the bot was supposed to learn from her interactions with other Twitter users. So the expectation was that people could just be normal and converse with Tay, which is the bot's name, and she could learn and respond. But because we can't have nice things, a small group of internet users deliberately interacted with Tay by flooding her timeline with racist and bigoted and hateful content. And since the bot was programmed to learn and respond from other users, it quickly started tweeting hateful content, causing Microsoft to pull the bot just 16 hours after they had launched it. So you can see that the creators of Tay had a much different intention and belief than the bad actors who decided to exploit this technology in a negative way. Now, this framework, looking at these 5 layers of belief, it shows the complexity of trying to decode what we want from our tech because there are so often multiple contradictions. For example, the vision of a venture capitalist that's funding a new platform might not be the same as the founders that are building the technology, which might not be the same as the people that end up using the product, or the people that look for ways to exploit it. Or consumers might say, you know what, we really value privacy, but then their actions show that they continue to use technology that violates their privacy. So what they really value isn't privacy, they actually value convenience and connection. More contradictions. And we can talk about our values and what we think and believe is important, but the market, that technological mirror, it shows us what people are willing to pay for and put up with. It shows us where our societal priorities are. And of course, we can't forget to mention bias within this conversation, the beliefs that we hold that we might not even be aware of that also get programmed into our tools. For example, in 2015, Amazon realized that the algorithm they were using to identify potential hiring candidates was biased against women. The algorithm, what it was supposed to do was compare resumes submitted over the past 10 years and identify similarities between candidates and people that had been hired at Amazon. But since the majority of applications and resumes received and the majority of hires just statistically happen to be more male, the algorithm learned to exclude female candidates, something that the programmers never intended. So bias can be devastating. They can have a deep, lasting impact on people's lives. In the US court system, there's a system called Compass that's used to predict whether or not a defendant has a high probability of recommitting a crime. Defendants are given a score that is then used by the judge to determine their sentence. Due to the data that was used, the model ended up giving twice twice as many false positives to black offenders than white offenders. Meaning, if a judge took that score into consideration, they would be more likely to give black defendants harsher prison sentences because the system wrongly predicted that they were a higher risk to the community, which wasn't even true. Now, what's even harder to believe is that the company that created Compass, they refused to share the details of how their system calculated that final score. They say it's proprietary IP, meaning that defendants have no transparency into how a score that could be used to influence their sentence is created. Now, I don't know about you, but I find that absolutely terrifying. Every technology that we use comes with this multi-layered levels of belief, which is why it's so important that we as a society, as the people building and using these tools, we have to get used to identifying and spotting and talking about those belief systems on a regular basis. So how do we do that? It's very simple. There are 2 steps that everybody can and should take. First, instead of asking, what does technology want? Let's flip it, and we should start by asking, what do we want? Take the time to really think about what you want and what you expect from the technologies that you use. Because once you've figured that out, and it might take you a little while, you can then move on to the next step, which is to assess the technologies that you use on a regular basis, to see the worldviews that are embedded in them, and see if there's an alignment with the type of future that you want to live in. If there's alignment, awesome. If not, you might have to think about making some changes. And I say this to clients all the time. I say, do a belief technological audit. Because do you even know what belief systems are in your tools, the ones that you use every day? Maybe your performance measuring software, maybe it uses an outdated view of productivity that doesn't make sense for the work you're doing today. Maybe your internal communication tools prioritize interruptions and distractions instead of giving people deep work periods, times when they can focus and concentrate. My point is that we have the power to choose, but to choose, we have to know what we want and what's important to us and our teams. I call this approach, which is really a mindset, FOPA, and FOPA stands for Future-Oriented Present Acting. What this means is that we recognize that while we can't predict the future, we can help shape it through our daily decisions. Like what technologies we choose to implement in the office, what social networks we spend our time on, who we share our data with, those are all important things. If we don't insist on ethical, sustainable, transparent, and inclusive technology today, how can we expect those values to become widespread and prioritized in the future? Remember, the market reflects our priority. For example, we've been so focused on the features of the technology, so obsessed with STEM degrees and computer science and teaching kids to code, that this emphasis on technical skills has resulted in a belief where other disciplines like art and literature and philosophy and history, they aren't considered as important to our society. And the result, we've created a generation of brilliant new graduates that know how to code, but not what to code or why to code, resulting in all of these ethical nightmares that we're currently struggling with as tech continues to become more sophisticated, invasive, and invisible. So my challenge to all of you is to ask yourselves, what are you going to do starting today to ensure a better technological future? Do you know what the funders of the tools that you're using want? Do you know what the founder wants? Do you know what the platform wants? Do you know what the users want? Do you know what the bad actors want? And more importantly, are you clear, absolutely crystal clear on what you want? Because technology is awesome, and it's also terrible. It is hero, it is villain, it is good, it is bad, it is all of it. But the deciding factor of the role it will play in our lives is up to us. So what are you going to choose?
So we are back online with Rahaf Harfoush. Thank you very much, Rahaf, for delivering us this talk. I mentioned your book. Here it is, in French, Overbooké, with a subtitle, Et si pour réussir, en français, il fallait travailler moins. Voilà le dernier ouvrage en français disponible de Rahaf Harfoush. So Rahaf, I ask you It might be. I'm not asking you what time is it for you because I believe you're in France. I'm not going to ask you if you agree about what you just hear, but I will go back to the question that I asked you just before we launched your talk, which was, since you're part of the Conseil National du Numérique in French, will you say that the framework you presented concerning the beliefs it can also be applied to government platform or public platform? And this question arises in the context of sovereignty, generally speaking, cloud sovereignty or things like that. So maybe if you can give us a first answer concerning this question.
It's a great question, and thank you for giving me the time to think about it. But yes, I absolutely believe that these frameworks should be used in any technology that is being applied in society. Often, as I mentioned, we only look at the technical specifications. We look at what we want the features to be, or how we want people to use it, or what the design's going to be, and we don't spend a lot of time thinking about our own belief systems, our own bias, our own worldviews. And I think that's a blind spot that governments and institutions should pay attention to.
Okay, thank you. So I've got a bunch of questions, very eclectic and different questions. So let's start by the first one. Do you think that Facebook and Google's algorithm just lock you down in your habits and culture, proposing you content in relation to what you search and published, basically creating a self-feeding and cycle and an echo chamber?
Yes, I do. And this is because the business model behind those algorithms are designed to try to get you to spend as much time on the apps as possible. You know, when I teach my students, we talk about information diets, and we talk about, thinking about, and I'll ask the question to the audience, and people can tweet their answers because I'd be interested to know, but what percentage of the information that you consume on a day-to-day basis is chosen for you by an algorithm? Because you have to decide as a human, and you have, as a user and as a reader and as a citizen, you have to decide and make a very intentional choice to go outside of an algorithm's reach. You have to hunt for different types of information. And if you're letting 100% of the information that you see, if you're letting Facebook or Google or Netflix or Amazon, if you're letting them choose, then you are voluntarily giving those companies a level of control over how you're developing your opinions and your own worldview.
And it's going to be and it's very tricky because some algorithms integrate the fact that sometimes they give you the opportunity to see things that you are not supposed to see in your own community. So it's very tricky to say simply just go outside without the algorithm, because some of the algorithms are also achieving this kind of activity and tasks.
Yeah, and the thing is, it's not saying that algorithms are bad. Algorithms do a lot of good. They help us find things that are relevant to us. They help us find things that could be helpful and could be useful. What I'm saying is we have to be intentional about this information. And that means we have to really think about, okay, how much of my media diet is being chosen for me. And a really easy way to do this is, for example, if you go to a Google page, try searching for something when you're logged in, and then open up an incognito window on Chrome, or open up a VPN or a private browser and type in the same search, and you'll see that you're getting different results. So this is a literacy issue. This is a skill set that people have to start thinking about while they're navigating the web, because I'm not saying don't use algorithms at all. Yeah. I'm just saying be aware of how and where and when algorithms are influencing you or are presenting things to you that might have a very specific intent behind it.
Thank you. So one other question is, what is the biggest human flaw that you think technology shows us? And what about our greatest attribute?
That's a hard question. I think the biggest flaw, honestly, is that we tend to think overly optimistically about ourselves. I think we like to see ourselves in a really great light, and then we put that vision of ourselves out there, and then we get surprised when it turns out that we're not necessarily completely right. So, for example, when I talked about bad actors, sometimes the most frustrating part about how people use technology isn't that
there are bad actors. It's that people are surprised that the technology is being exploited. So I think it would be really good for us to just be more realistic, to hope for the best, but prepare for the worst, and to assume that at some point someone is going to exploit this technology, so we're not surprised. And in terms of our best attributes, I think we can be incredibly generous and motivated and kind. And I think my favorite parts of the web are when you see communities come together to create a positive impact on their country, locally, regionally. When people raise money for families in need, when people come together to help solve a problem collectively, that's when I think our capacity to cooperate and be generous is our greatest asset. And then we release technology in the world thinking everything's going to be perfect, and then we get really shocked when somebody decides to exploit it.
Thank you. A very open question. You say we can't have nice things. What's your favorite nice thing that has emerged from technology, or one you wish we could have?
I think technology has given us so many nice things. I think, my favorite nice thing, I love my computer, and I love my phone, and I love certain apps that I use. So I think technology can give us so much, and this is why I like to be not just pessimistic and warning about blind spots, but in the totality of the experience, I think we have a lot of good that comes from technology. Honestly, what I'd love to see is business models that are built upon the idea of ethical, transparent, and sustainable technologies. I would like to see business models that put privacy at the center, business models that put data sovereignty at the center, because so many business models that we see today have been borrowed, and we didn't have to think about those things 10 to 15 years ago, and yet we're still dealing with those impacts. So I would love to see more companies, more startups, more apps, more programs that are really built from the ground up with this ethical center in mind.
Okay, that's clear. Thank you. So we are here live with Rahaf. 15 minutes to still going through the questions that you've got for her. Another philosophical question, be aware. Where do our beliefs about work come from? And how does the intersection of technology and work impact these ideas?
We have a very philosophical audience, but I'm going to try my best to give you a short answer. The long answer is in the book because it took me 3 years to research and answer that question properly. But in summary, our beliefs about work come from a lot of different sources. First, they come from you, your upbringing, the way your parents talked to you about work, the way your parents talked to you about success, what they believe needed to happen in order for somebody to succeed. So, for example, my parents were immigrants from Syria. We immigrated to Canada, and they believed that, hard work was the only way to survive, that you had to work hard to survive. And that's a belief that I've sort of carried throughout my life. So that's one. Two, there's also history. So there's the systems that we use, like our to-do lists or calendars, that have in them a belief about what productivity should look like. So legacy systems or parts of our history that we have just continued to use without really thinking about it. And then three, our media. So when you look at our work culture, for example, in Overbouquet, I talk about what I call work heroes. So when you look in the media and you read article after article about what time Jeff Bezos wakes up in the morning or what time Tim Cook sends an email to his team, and you start to see that the media tells you a story about who we should admire, who we should respect. And oftentimes we talk about successful people in terms of how hard they work. So all of that comes into play where you develop this internalized set of beliefs and behaviors where you think, if I don't work hard, I'm not going to be successful. If I don't work hard, I'm not going to be deserving of my success. If I don't work hard, I'm never going to be like Jeff Bezos. And all of that stuff just becomes a part of you. So you don't even notice the beliefs anymore. You just know that you think You just know that you feel guilty if you don't work on the weekend, or you feel guilty if you're not answering emails right away. And so this is why productivity is such a complicated thing, because it's not just fix a policy or use technology differently. It's really about your beliefs as a person. And technology, especially social media, just takes those stories that our society tells itself about success, and it puts it on Facebook and on Instagram and online, and it just keeps repeating it to you. And then you have algorithms, as we talked about, that says, hey, Rahaf looks at this content. Let's show her more. Let's show her more productivity tips and more tools to use to get to be more efficient. So then technology just takes all of those belief systems and constantly shows you options and tools that send a very specific message about how we should be working.
And of course, more in your book. Talking about your book, it seems there is someone in the audience who already read your book, who says your book talks about this rafting concept of hustle and float. What is your favorite way to not be productive and float?
Well, one, thank you so much for reading for reading the book. I was scared when you said somebody already read it. I said, oh, I hope they liked it. My favorite part of floating is to garden. I like to take walks with my dog. I like to read a good book. Sometimes I just like to sit in the garden or sit outside and not do anything at all. Just be. I find that in our life right now, we have so much stimulation, so much content. Our brains are always acting so fast that I try to give myself some time to just have a quiet brain. So those are my favorite ways. I like to be out in nature, and I like to just give my body a chance to move and not think too hard. So I like to go on long walks, and I like to work in the garden.
And some people are working here for the speaker's experience, and it seems that they know you very well, because I hear that you like to collect words that only exist in one language. So what is your favorite word that doesn't exist in French or either English? I don't know if it's correct that you're collecting.
Yes, it's true. That's so your team has done its research. Okay, so I don't know how to pronounce this word, so I'm not going to try, but I'm going to explain to you what this means, because it's one of my favorite words. So there's a word in Japanese where this is what it means. It's when somebody offers to do you a favor, right? You say, no, thank you. I really don't need this. They insist. They're like, no, I'm going to do this favor for you. Then they do the favor, but they mess it up, and it becomes really inconvenient, and it creates so much trouble for you. But because of social etiquette, you still have to say thank you. I think it's so funny that there's a word that encapsulates that whole experience in just one word. So that's one. And then there is a German word that means grief bacon, literally. And that is when you eat your feelings. That's when you're feeling sad. And so you just eat to make yourself feel better. And I don't think that exists in French or in English. And so those are some of my favorite words that always make me laugh.
Okay. Question concerning education, largely speaking. Can we adapt the education, especially for the children, to help in being more aware of the negative impact of social networks? But maybe not only child, because you're a professor at Sciences Po, for example. You've got young people. You've seen a switch or trend concerning this, the maturity of our youth concerning the relationship with the digital world, generally speaking?
Yes. Over the past several years that I've been teaching at Sciences Po, I've noticed that my students that are very bright, very smart, very active intellectually, that they don't know, or they don't have the skill sets in navigating an information ecosystem strategically. They don't know how to build an information diet. They don't know how to deconnect their brain. They don't know how to create, pipelines of information that's enriching and educational. And so what I had to do about 4 years ago is I created a unit in my class, one entire unit that's just dedicated to teaching people how to navigate the internet. How do you build a diet? What kind of information? How often should you spend online? What resources are you reading? Are you fact checking? Where are you getting this information? How much of it is algorithmically controlled? So these are all things that can be learned and taught. And the problem is we're just not giving them the tools, because once they take my class, I've had students message me years later saying these tools really changed the way that I live my digital life. And so I think they're not hard. I think anybody can learn them. We just have to start treating this ecosystem as a resource and treating our brains as as an apparatus that can learn and be taught how to navigate it properly.
I think you do consulting, or you're doing talk in companies. You're invited to talk, to present your work concerning the way we see work and productivity. How has the enterprise, the corporate world, received your work? Does anything that surprise you in the way they receive your work, your thesis, or by the question that they ask just after you talk to this kind of audience?
So a lot of things surprised me, but one of the biggest things that I wasn't expecting, because I had done all this research and, I had gone through this emotional process of relearning how to have a better relationship with productivity. So I had done this. And what I didn't expect was I would go into a company and I would talk about, the ways that the media influences us, that our background influences us, that our childhood influences us. And sometimes there would be people in the audience that were very resistant. They would get very mad at me and angry when I would say things like, your job does not determine your self-worth, and that you shouldn't link your goodness as a person to your LinkedIn profile. So it always surprised me at the beginning how some people got really upset. And it was like, no, hard work is the only way to succeed. If I don't work hard, I love my job. Why are you telling me that I shouldn't love my job? And it was just like very emotional. And it took me a while to realize that asking people to look inside themselves and to look at their insecurities, their need to be validated, their need to be recognized and seen as important, their need to be seen as deserving of their success is very powerful. And if you poke at that, and if they're not ready, they are going to put up a big angry wall. So that's on the individual side. On the leadership side, what's interesting is that there was a little bit of resistance in terms of telling companies they had to change their system. But I've noticed in the last 2 years that has changed, because as you might know, in 2019, the World Health Organization declared that burnout was an occupational hazard that was happening worldwide. And I have heard firsthand from my clients, big companies in accounting, finance, aviation, law, insurance, across industries, that they're losing good people to burnout, that people are leaving because these work conditions are not sustainable. So on the individual level, I see personal resistance, but on the enterprise level, I'm actually seeing companies that are more open to having these conversations, because especially with the pandemic, the old systems that we have in place, they were never designed for knowledge work. They were never designed for us, and these systems are hurting us. And so companies are finally saying, is there a better way? What can we do to make our workers healthier, happier, more creative? Because they're starting to understand that you can't be innovative and strategic and responsive. You can't do that if you're tired, if you're burnt out, if you're not sleeping enough, if you're spending 16 hours in front of the computer. It's just not possible. So they're starting to link it to their success, which is really, really great to see.
Yeah, so the leave of some people might be a good indicator that something might be changing. Question that says, I loved your point of convenience versus security. What does it say about us as a species? Why would we naturally privilege comfort instead of protection when it comes to navigating online?
I honestly think that many people just got used to the web being a certain way. I don't think it's an active decision to, not care about privacy. I think if you ask the average person, do you care about being protected online? They would say yes. It's just that the systems that we've been using have become more dangerous, right? Like 15 years ago, we didn't have the level of data analytics that we have today. 15 years ago or 20 years ago, we didn't have all these databases talking to each other, building profiles of us. So the risks when we started using these tools at the beginning are very different than the risks that we face today. And I think some people just haven't updated their understanding of what they're losing. Because as I mentioned, when you do access these platforms, there are benefits. You're connected to your family and friends, you're connected to community. And I think those things are very human. It's very human to want to be seen and be heard and to be in touch with people and to feel like you're a part of something. What worries me is that these tools are becoming more invisible, more entrenched. Like my Facebook account is tracking me even when I'm not on Facebook, or the analytical data sets from my grocery store is being sold to another company. So we just don't know the sophistication of the information that's being collected about us. And so I don't think it's necessarily, bad. I just think it's something that we have to think about and talk about, because I believe that it is possible to have social networks that don't sell your data.
Thank you. So we're running out of time. Thank you very much, Rahaf, for being with us. Thank you for recording your talk. Thank you for answering all this kind of question. I am one of the people that think that the pandemic has, concerning this burnout problem, has raised a new real problem. So thank you very much for your insight. Thank you very much for being with us, Rahaf, and have a nice day, and hope to see you in Paris once the pandemic will be maybe over. Thank you very much, Rahaf. Thank you very much for being with us. Bye-bye.
Thanks for having me. Bye-bye.